let's talk about why this heavy, sticky, exhausting thing called shame shows up so often when we have a chronic illness. So, shame is pretty tricky because it's really quiet a lot of the time. And it's not usually screaming at us, it is there in the back of our mind, lurking and hiding in the background like a shadow, right? It's overshadowing everything we do, everything we feel, everything we say, all of our interactions. It affects everything. So, let's start by untangling two things. And that is going to be shame and guilt. So, guilt is when you feel bad for something that you did, like I missed an appointment or I forgot someone's birthday. Guilt is focused on actions, but shame runs much deeper. So, shame says, hey, there's something wrong with who I am. Not just I didn't do the thing, but I am the thing that's wrong. And chronic illnesses, especially the invisible kind, right? Like chronic fatigue, POTS, MCAS, autoimmune, long COVID, shame loves to crawl into those spaces. And you might not even realize it, but if you've ever thought, well, why can't I just push through like everyone else? I should be doing more by now. I'm always tired. I must be weak. Everyone else seems to keep up, so what's wrong with me? You've clearly met shame if you've said any of those things to yourself, if you've thought any of those things. Now, here's why it latches on so easily in this context. Most of the people that I work with, and maybe you too, have been through this frustrating loop. You start to feel off, you feel exhausted, dysregulated, overstimulated. Then what happens? You go to your doctor, you explain it to them, they run labs, everything comes back normal. And then you're sitting there with all of these very real symptoms, and you're told, sometimes directly, sometimes in the tone of their voice, well, there's nothing really wrong. And then you internalize that. If there's nothing medically wrong, well, maybe it's just me. And that is shame. That is what shame does. Even well-meaning friends, family, coworkers, anyone can feed this without realizing it. They might say things like, you look fine, or have you tried getting more sleep, or I'm tired too. And instead of support, you get shame in return. Right? And then you start hiding your symptoms or pushing through. You apologize for resting. You ignore when you need accommodations. You push harder and harder and harder and feel worse. And then you blame yourself for that too. And it becomes this exhausting spiral where you are constantly trying to prove that you are not lazy, that you are not dramatic or fragile. And that brings us to the culture that we live in today, right? This grind, hustle culture where our worth is tied to how much we do, how productive we are, how many tasks we can check off a list before 10 a.m. Especially for women, maybe you're in a caretaking role or you are in a faith-based community. And there's often these deeply baked in messages that say, if you rest, you're slacking. If you can't show up at 110, 120%, you're failing. If you need help, you're a burden. And shame thrives on that, right? It thrives in these environments that tells us you should be grateful. You should be able to do everything. You should push through. You don't need anyone else. And even in wellness spaces, and this gets me every time, you might see others healing faster. They're changing their diet, they're exercising more, they're going out more, they're doing all the right things. And suddenly they're running marathons, they're launching new businesses. And here you are still exhausted after folding the laundry, after eating, after walking to the bathroom, after having an overstimulating conversation that was 5 minutes long. And then you start to think, well, what am I doing wrong? Why is it so hard for me? Maybe I'm just not trying hard enough. But the truth is that you are not a project to fix. Your body is not a broken machine. It is a brilliant system that has been through a lot, and it's doing its best to keep you alive. And sometimes it's that very effort that looks like fatigue, shutdown, emotional numbness, even a freeze state. So here's what I want you to hear from me. If you are experiencing shame around your illness, around your healing journey, it makes sense. This is your nervous system, right? It is a response from your nervous system. Your body is trying to survive in a world that rarely makes space for slowness, for sensitivity, for creativity, for symptoms that can't be fixed in one pill or 1 week. Let me share with you some real life examples that I've personally heard. I feel like a prisoner in my own body, like my body's betrayed me. I can't keep up, and that makes me feel like a burden. I'm tired of apologizing for needing rest. And maybe you've said something like that to yourself too. If so, you are not alone, you are not broken, and I am so glad that you are here because we are going to keep walking through this together, and we're going to talk about how shame affects your nervous system, how it gets embedded in your thoughts, how it gets into your body, how it can affect your symptoms and your chronic illness, and how to begin gently unhooking from all of that. So shame isn't just emotional. You've probably picked that up from everything I've said so far. It is biological. And once you start to understand how it moves through your nervous system, it makes so much more sense as to why healing can feel like an uphill climb. So when we talk about shame in the context of chronic illness, we are not just talking about feeling embarrassed or feeling guilty. Shame is a whole body survival response. It activates the same biological system as fear, as danger, as trauma. And the tricky thing is, as I mentioned, it flies under the radar, right? It can show up as fatigue, it can show up as anxiety, as gut issues, even muscle tension, right? So let's break it down. When you feel shame, your brain reads it as a threat to belonging. And I know that might sound a little dramatic, but it is deeply wired into our biology. Humans are very social creatures, and for most of human history, being cast out of the group meant danger or even death. So when we feel ashamed, especially about something as intimate and vulnerable as our body or our health, our system goes into that protection mode. And what happens when we're shifted into survival mode, into that sympathetic response? That means our cortisol spikes, our inflammation rises, our digestion slows, maybe it even stops and we get constipated. Our immune function gets suppressed. Blood flow redirects to larger muscles, preparing you to fight or to run. Sometimes freeze, right? And shame, especially when chronic, pushes you into that survival mode. So it's not necessarily a mindset issue, it is a full body physiological shift. And the longer that you stay there, the harder it is for your body to return into that parasympathetic healing mode. If you live with chronic illness, you're probably intimately familiar with collapse, freeze, or fawn states. So collapse feels like giving up, right? It's that fatigue, that dissociation, that hopelessness. Fawn looks like over-apologizing. It's people-pleasing, pretending to be okay when you're really not. And both of these are nervous system responses to shame. So your body is trying to stay safe by avoiding further rejection or criticism. And you might not even realize it's happening. You might say, well, I'm just tired, or I don't want to bother anyone. But underneath all of that, your nervous system is saying, let's shrink down. Let's try to stay really small so we don't get seen, so we don't get hurt again. So the cycle that I see so many people getting caught in is you experience symptoms that disrupt your life. And then you start to feel frustrated, angry, afraid, and then the shame creeps in, right? I should be better than this. I should be better already. I should be back to my normal life again. Why can't I handle this? What's wrong with me? And that shame keeps your nervous system in a state of survival. Every one of those thoughts activates that stress response again and again and again. And our symptoms are flared up when our survival response is engaged, which means your symptoms aren't going to improve. And more than likely, you're going to feel worse when that stress response is triggered, which means you're probably going to feel more ashamed that you're still feeling unwell, right? It's a brutal loop. And I don't say this lightly, and I understand, because if any of you who are currently listening and this is your first video, I was there. I was bedridden for almost a year, stuck in a freeze state with multiple chronic illnesses. I was diagnosed with long COVID, with POTS, with Hashimoto's. So if I can do it and I can disrupt this cycle, I know whoever's listening to this can also do it. So I want you to understand something really, really important, and that is that your nervous system will not release what it does not feel safe to process. So if shame is running the show, your body is going to hold on to that. And those emotions stay stuck. They get embedded in our body. Our muscles stay tense, our posture suffers, our gut stays inflamed. It leads to a bunch of chronic pain, fatigue. Our bodies can't detox. They can't regulate hormones efficiently. This is physiology. And that's why so many nervous system tools probably won't work for you if there's that deep undercurrent of shame. If you're not also addressing those emotions, the breath work might not help, right? The meditations might not help. Your mind might still be racing. You're still having really bad symptoms. And then you lie down to rest and you feel anxious instead. And until your system feels safe enough to really soften, to process these things, a lot of these tools may not land. And shame is one of the biggest barriers to that sense of safety that I see with people who struggle with chronic illnesses, who are trying to recover from these debilitating illnesses. So the good news is, after all that doom and gloom, that shame cannot survive in the presence of compassion. So when someone sees you, and I mean really sees you, and does not flinch, that shame starts to loosen. This is why co-regulation matters. Having safe, supportive people around you who are validating your experience without rushing you to try to fix it can help you unwind that shame response. And this can look like therapy. It can look like trauma-informed coaching, nervous system coaching, supportive community spaces like The Garden, which will be linked below. All of these things can help your nervous system feel safe enough to start integrating those stuck pieces. And on a personal level, that means offering yourself compassion, and not the fake kind of compassion, not the sugar-coated kind, but quiet, honest acknowledgement that says, hey, of course you feel this way. Of course it's hard. And none of this means that you are broken. Because that shame thrives in silence. It thrives in that isolation. So when it's named and you meet it with gentleness and with grace and compassion, it starts to dissolve. Once we understand how shame operates in the body, the next step is to notice how it speaks, right? The narratives that it uses in our mind. So the way that it sneaks into your specific self-talk, your identity, your relationships. Notice I'm saying you because it is individual to you. And awareness here is everything. So once you can name the story, then you create that space to choose a new one, to rewrite it. So self-perception shame. This shows up in thoughts like I'm lazy, I'm falling behind, I'm not trying hard enough, I must be making this up. And these are very common, especially when the illness is invisible. So you might be doing everything in your power to support your healing, but you still feel like you're not doing enough. And that is the shame talking. Your nervous system can't regulate under that constant self-attack. So it starts to see even rest or stillness as dangerous. We also have body-based shame, and this is the shame that you feel about your body itself. So this could be the way that it looks, the way that it feels, the way that it functions or doesn't function. Maybe you're embarrassed about weight gain or mobility issues, skin changes that have happened, how much help you need to do daily tasks. You might even mourn the version of you that used to run, who used to work long hours or socialize without crashing. And then you feel shame for grieving. But let me be clear, there is nothing wrong with grieving what illness has changed. And that grief doesn't mean that you're ungrateful or negative, it means that you're human. But what we have to understand is the more that we hang on to that grief, the more we're going to suffer. If we grieve and let it pass, we're releasing it. That's completely different. Spiritual or existential shame can sound like, well, maybe I'm being punished. Maybe God hates me. I must not be manifesting correctly. Maybe I don't deserve to heal. So if you've spent time in spiritual or wellness spaces, maybe in religious culture, you may have heard subtle or not so subtle messages that your illness is your fault, that you are being punished. If you are being disobedient, this is why this is happening. That if you had the right mindset, if you had the right vibration, the right affirmations, the right prayers, you would be better, you would feel better, you would be well and healthy. And that belief system is a fast track to spiritual shame. It's creating pressure to stay positive, to perform healing correctly or perfectly, or to risk being blamed for your own suffering. But you are not being punished and you are not broken, and healing isn't a reward for getting everything right and for being perfect in God's eyes. Relational shame is big too, right? Shame doesn't just live inside of us. It often shows up in our relationships. So you might feel like a burden to your partner, to your family, to your friends. Maybe you feel ashamed for canceling plans, needing accommodations, or for asking for help. Maybe you feel like you're too much because of your sensitivity, because of your pain, your fatigue, your emotions, your needs. And this relational shame often leads to a lot of withdrawal. You start hiding how you feel, you stop asking for support, you overfunction to prove that you're not high maintenance. But that isolation fuels shame. Earlier we talked about how darkness and isolation and ignorance of the shame fuel it, and it really does. And you deserve relationships where your needs aren't too much and where your pain isn't minimized. Even if people don't fully understand it, they acknowledge it and care for you anyway. So I want you to know that you don't have to fix everything today. But one of the most powerful steps that you can take is to notice these narratives, notice them, acknowledge them as they come up. And you can ask yourself, well, what stories do I carry about my worth in relation to my health? Or whose voice is that in my head? Is it mine or is it someone else's? And just asking questions like these gently opens up that door to healing, right? It engages that curiosity. And if you want a place to start softening those inner voices, you can open up any of the EFT tapping sessions on our YouTube channel, or feel free to join our community, The Garden, which will also be linked below. And they are both designed for moments like this, and to remind you that healing doesn't require perfection, to remind you that it requires permission to be here, to be present with other people and co-regulate your system, right? To feel what you feel and not feel ashamed of that, to move forward, even if it's slowly, and to know that you're not behind. So let's talk about what actually happens in the body and what happens in the mind when shame gets wrapped around your healing journey. Because obviously it makes you feel bad. We've talked about how it can increase symptoms and fuel more shame. But it changes the way that you show up for yourself, right? It rewires your choices. It distorts the way you see your progress. It keeps you swinging between extremes, that push and pull, that push and crash. So for some of us, that shame feels like a full stop, a full shutdown. You hit a wall and your body quits, right? There's no motivation, there's no hope. You cancel your appointments, you stop taking supplements, you stop showering, you stop going to your support groups. And it's not because you don't care. It's because your system is overwhelmed, it's fatigued, and it's afraid that it's going to fail again. And for some people, it's the opposite, and that overcompensation becomes the armor. So maybe you double down. Maybe you start doing all the things. Your supplement cabinet is overflowing. You're obsessively tracking symptoms. You're cutting out entire food groups. You're reading every label twice. You might even call it discipline. But what's underneath that label of discipline? Fear, right? A fear of being seen as lazy. A fear of being the one who never gets better. A fear of being judged for resting. So instead of healing becoming a process of repair and rest, it becomes another source of pressure, a test that you feel like you're failing. And one of the hardest things to see in yourself is how shame can drive even your best intentions. So you might be taking every supplement on your list, not because you trust them, but because you're terrified not to take them. Maybe you force yourself to stick to a plan even if your body is saying no. You add more and more and more to your routine out of a subtle panic that if you stop, you're going to backslide. And this is how that shame disguises itself as motivation. But true healing isn't going to come from a place of fear. It is going to come from a place of safety, of grace, of self-trust, of gentle consistency, not performance. And when your health decisions are rooted in self-doubt or in fear of judgment, your nervous system doesn't register safety, right? It stays in a low-grade fight, flight, or freeze response where you are constantly burning all of this energy instead of restoring it. So let's pause here for a moment and talk about freeze, because your freeze response is a place where shame and nervous system dysregulation get tangled up, right? So when your nervous system is in a freeze state, it's not resting, it is disengaging. So you might feel detached from your body. You might feel numb, heavy, foggy, and fatigued, like you should be able to relax, but something won't let you. And shame often triggers that freeze state, right? Especially when it's tied to memories of being judged in the past or being dismissed or ignored, especially revolving around symptoms, right? So if your nervous system has learned that showing up gets you hurt or humiliated, that freeze state becomes a way to disappear, a way for you to be safe, to minimize yourself, to shrink yourself down. But healing can't fully happen in a freeze state because the body's not processing, it's protecting. So you might be doing the yoga, you might be doing the protocol, the detox, but if you're doing it from a frozen place, your body can't integrate it. It just doesn't feel safe enough to. So shame can also show up in how we interpret our setbacks. So when you're in a flare-up, obviously your body is asking for more gentleness and support. But if shame is running the show, what happens? Your mind says, hey, this is my fault. I should have known better. I'm doing something wrong. This means I'm not healing. I'm not making progress. I'm never going to get better. But the truth is that flares are not failures. They are information, data. They are a part of your healing process. But if you have internalized shame, you will likely interpret every single bump in the road, every new symptom, every single flare-up as proof that you aren't good enough to heal. And that belief is exhausting, because it keeps you cycling between over-effort, burnout, and collapse. And it turns your healing into a performance instead of a relationship. So let's get into the how, right? Because understanding shame is helpful, but what really matters is what you do with it. So we're not going to power through it. We are going to disarm it. And the way that we do that is through safety. So we want compassion-based tools that are powerful, tools that are going to speak to the parts of us that have been judged, blamed, shamed, and tools that offer something different, right? Something to combat that, something with warmth, with grace, with understanding, compassion. Now, this is one of the core tools inside of our nervous system healing code called the Grove Method. And it walks through 5 steps to gently shift you out of fear and into grounded observation. So G is for grounding yourself with breath or sensation. So you can do this with any breathing exercise that you feel comfortable with. For me, the easiest one that I did when I was bedridden was a physiological sigh. So 2 sips of air in through the nose, exhale out through the mouth slowly. So and then R is for recognizing what you're feeling without judgment. So maybe I'm feeling shame. Okay? Observe the inner dialogue around that. That's the O. Okay, so I feel shame that I'm not better yet, that I'm not better already. I feel ashamed that, I need help all the time. It makes me feel unworthy of healing. Then with the V, we validate that experience. Well, of course I feel that way. Here's why I feel this way. It's okay to feel this way, right? E is where we empathize. We empathize with ourselves. You are doing the best you can with what you have. Remind yourself of that. So you can say thank you to my body, thank you to my mind, to my spirit for protecting me, for doing the best it could with what it currently has. But I want to release this shame. I want to release these feelings of unworthiness, of guilt. And allow your body to do that, to do what it does, to release these pent-up emotions and this tension. And that will help you relax your nervous system and cue to it that it is safe, right? That you're not in danger, that you don't have to prove your worth by pushing through. Because what did we say earlier? When the opposite happens and we're stressed and our nervous system is shifted into survival mode, it's going to flare up symptoms. It's going to keep us stuck in these loops where we're chronically burnt out and down. So again, when you notice that shame creeping in, you want to notice it, name it, and nurture yourself, right? Acknowledge how your body is feeling, how your mind is feeling. Give it permission to exist in that moment, and then gently reframe it. I truly hope that today's video was helpful for you, that it has taught you more about your body, how it works, how chronic illness can get flared up, and how we can get stuck in these cycles of burnout and fatigue, and a gentle way for you to start shifting your nervous system towards recovery and towards healing. And if you are looking for more ways to calm your nervous system in the moment, please go and check out our YouTube channel. We have plenty of EFT tapping videos which help to shift your nervous system from that fight or flight state into that healing mode. And most of them are very quick, like 5 to 10 minutes max. And we acknowledge, again, we notice what we're feeling, we acknowledge it, we gently reframe our thinking and rewrite those neural pathways so that we're more likely in the future to think a certain way. And it helps us in the moment too to calm down our symptoms and shift again into that parasympathetic healing state. So there will be plenty of links below for you if you would like further information on our channel, on our website, our services. And I hope this has blessed you, and I'll see you next time.